It was called the broken windows theory. The theory was that we had to pay attention to everything. We couldn't just pay attention to the big crimes and the big criminals. We had to pay attention to the people on the street who were selling drugs. We had to pay attention to the prostitutes. We had to pay attention to the breaking down of our buildings. We had to pay attention to the graffiti. We couldn't pay as much attention to that as we could pay as we had to pay to the murders and the big drug dealers and the rapes and the serial killers. But we had to pay some attention to that. We just couldn't ignore that. We had to fix our neighborhoods, and we had to have our police involved in those neighborhoods doing that. The broken windows theory comes from two professors from Harvard, and it was written in 1981. And here's the theory. You'll see why it's called the broken windows theory when I explain it to you. It's Professors Kelling and Wilson. And what they say is, if you have a building, and somebody breaks the first window, but you say that's not important enough to pay any attention to because I've got a big business to run and lots of other things to do and you don't pay attention to. Then they break a second window and a third window and a fourth window and you keep not paying attention to it. Finally, the whole building falls down because the foundation has become rotted. And that's what was happening. We were rotting the foundation. We were teaching children from the time they were young that criminal acts were okay, that criminals ran neighborhoods, that criminals were more important than police. And we had to start rebuilding, not just from the top down, but from the bottom up. So that's the broken windows theory. Second was a process called COMSTAT. I would say this is the single most important reason we were able to reduce crime. I developed, along with the police commissioner and his chief aide, Jack Mabel, a program called COMSTAT. Here's what it is. It's simple to describe quickly. It's very hard to describe in detail. And I know some of your police officials, including your superintendent, have come and seen it in New York. They've seen how it operates. We measure crime every single day in every single precinct of New York City. If right now, in New York City, someone's home is broken into, and they call the police fill out a report. It has all the requisite information that we need. How many people, time of day, identification, anything we can get, goes on a report. It immediately goes into a computer in the precinct. That computer immediately goes to headquarters. Probably it's happening right now. By the end of the night, we have all the crimes that happened in New York City that day. By the next morning, we can analyze them. We can analyze them not just by the number, but we can analyze them by the type of crime. We can analyze them by where they took place. We can analyze them by geography. We can pin map them. We have a giant map of New York City. And anytime I wanted to, I could go to the command center, I could press a button, and I could see every crime that took place, and where it took place, and where they were accumulating crime. But then I could press another button. You know what the other button would do? The other button would show me where my police were when those crimes were taking place. So here were the crimes, here were the police. Not only that, I could press another button and it could tell me what time of day the crimes took place. And where were my police at that time of day. So what it allowed me to do, and now it's become so much more complicated, it would take me hours to really describe it. But that's the simple part of it. What it would allow me and the police commissioner to do, it would allow me to move my police around to where the criminals were operating. And here's a process that goes on with criminals. When the police do a good job of chasing them out of one area, they go to another area. And then it takes a while to find them in the other area. With the COMSTAT program, you find them the next day in that area. So you really are chasing them all around the city. Ultimately, they get so upset, they go to some other city. I used to send a lot of them to New Jersey. So, gathering the statistics accurately, putting them in a computer, being able to do those 3 or 4 processes that I said is very important. But there's something more important than that. I have taught the CompStat program maybe 20 times to cities, to countries, military, and even to businesses, because it helps track business as well. I will be honest with you. Half the time it works brilliantly. Half the time it fails miserably. I'm going to tell you why. It's not because they can't collect the statistics. I could teach all of you how to collect the statistics in 4 months. And you'd get it right. A few mistakes at the beginning, the collecting the statistics. All 20 did the collecting of the statistics perfectly. But here's what happens. And it happens in a lot of businesses and governments. We produce so many darn reports that what happens to reports in businesses and governments is they get put in people's desk and nobody pays attention to them. Somebody goes back 3 years later and finds a report from 3 years ago they never looked at. I knew from my experience with the FBI and the DEA, I used to run the DEA, that if I could get crime statistics daily, I could use them as part of the strategy of how I fought crime. So what I insisted on was that we were not going to put these statistics in a desk. We were going to have every week a confrontation with our statistics. We were going to confront our success or failure. Every Thursday morning at 8 o'clock, it happened yesterday, at 8 o'clock in the morning, at the Central Command Center of the New York City Police Department, the New York City Police Commissioner, the top people in the police department, and one of the 7 borough commands. We have 7 different borough commands. One shows up each week. One of the 7 borough commands shows up, and on the board is their performance. Right on that board is, did they do a good job or a bad job? And if they did a good job, where? And if they did a bad job, where? And then they're asked, why? Why did the auto thefts go up in one neighborhood, but they didn't go up in the other neighborhood? And the police commander had to explain why. He might not have had a good answer. Or he might have had a good answer. His good answer might have been, you have given more police to the other precincts. I have half the number of police. So it creates accountability. What that police commander just did was he switched the accountability from him to the police commissioner and to me to provide him with enough police officers. So if he was right, and we decided he was right, and half the times they were right, maybe more, we gave him more police officers. However, 7 weeks later, he was sitting in the same chair with the same statistics. And he had 100 more police officers. And the auto rates of crime still went up. That's when we got a new police command. That's accountability. Or, miraculously, they went down. That's when this man was put on the list for promotion. And I'm going to give you one more example, because I think this one probably describes it better of all, and it's the simplest. You know that New York City has a vast subway system. It's one of our great gifts that was given to us roughly at the beginning of the 20th century. Could never be built now, but it connects almost the whole city. It's the biggest subway system, I believe, in the world. However, for 30 years, people were frightened of the New York City subway system. You have watched movies about that. You may not remember it. Death Wish. I don't know if you've ever seen Death Wish with about murders in the subway. You've seen, Denzel Washington's new movie about murder in the subway, and murder in the subway, and murder in the subway, and murder. Well, there were so many movies about it, people became really frightened of murder in the subway. Now, here's the truth. There's never been as much murder in the subway as on the streets. It's just more frightening. It's frightening because you're closed in. So for 30 years it took for us to figure this out. For 30 years, people would run for mayor, police commissioners would be police commissioners. They would say, I'm going to stop murder in the subway. I'm going to put more police on the subway trains. So we put more police on the subway trains. We put more police on the subway trains. Because we didn't have a ComStat program, we never figured out crime continued to go up. How could we be putting more police on the subway trains and crime is going up? About the third week we had the ComStat program, we did a study of the subways. And you know what we found out? 75% of our police officers were in the subway trains, and 75% of the criminals were on the platform, stealing, robbing, killing people. We had the police in the wrong place. The criminals were waving at the police as the police went by in the subway trains. We had to switch it. We had to put our resources where the crime was. Crime went way down. Criminals moved out to the platform. We moved the police officers back out to the platform. Back and forth, back and forth. And it's that program, that's a simple description, that's the program we use to reduce drugs to the lowest level in New York in probably 50 years, by chasing them from neighborhood to neighborhood, and then trying to restore those neighborhoods. So those are the main programs. There's also two others that I'll mention, and then I'll mention them in context of Mexico. One is the career criminal program. It's really only a few people that commit most of the crimes. Very few, much fewer than you think. And when you catch them, you got to put them away for a long time. Think of a guy who robs homes, home invasions. That's his business. You catch him, you put him in jail for 2 years. He's out for 4 more years. Then you put him in jail for 3 years. He's out for 5 more years. If you had put him in jail for 10 years, you probably would have reduced home invasions by 3,000. Because he's what's known as a career criminal. He's not going to change. You're not going to fix him. He's not going to get any better. When you get him, and he's a bad one, you put him in jail for a long time. We have what's called 3 strikes and you're out. This, unfortunately, is what applied to the Yankees this year. 3 strikes and you're out is when you commit your 3rd serious crime, you go to jail for the rest of your life. I'm sorry. You want to screw us once, you go for 10 years. You want to screw us twice, you go for 20 years. The 3rd time you want to hurt us, you're never getting out of jail. And that had a major impact on the crime rates. Which gets me to the final point that I want to make about this, which is, and I'll make this particularly with reference to Mexico, and it applies to many of the Latin American countries. Reducing crime is just not about the police. The police cannot do it on their own. Of course they need the help of the community. But they also need, whenever you think about how to reduce crime, you've got to give an equal amount of thought to the prosecutors, to the courts, and to the prisons. Because it's all part of one system. It's all part of one system. If only 2 out of 8 if only 2 out of 10 of the people who commit murder in Mexico go to jail, and 8 out of 10 in San Diego go to jail, that's not the fault of the police. The police are catching the murderers. It's the fault of the prosecutors and the courts. And the responsibility has to be put on them, the same way it's put on the police. And the CompStat program that's applied to the police has to be applied to them. This is the situation right now that we're doing for Colombia, because this is what's happening in Colombia. The police, like your police in Tijuana, have improved tremendously. They've done a good job. They're arresting the people. But then, 2 out of 10 go to jail. So what we're working on is a program, a CompStat program, where we can measure the inefficiency of the prosecutors and the courts so that they get embarrassed and that the national government and President Santos then has the report that he needs to make those changes so that those prosecutors prosecute more of the cases, so that maybe you hire more prosecutors, you hire better ones, that the judges put more of them in jail. When I added 5,000 police officers, I added 2,000 prosecutors, because I knew my 5,000 police officers would produce cases for 2,000 more prosecutors. So think of it as one system. And finally, we'll lead into Mexico by asking the following question, which I know is a political question in your country, but this is a political question all over the world. There's a political question in America, there's a political question in Asia, a political question everywhere. What's the best way to reduce crime? Social programs or law enforcement? Some people will say the best way to reduce crime is fix the schools, more jobs, better hospitals, more roads, better communities. That's one side. The other side would say the best way to reduce crime is more police, more prosecutors, more courts, and longer jail sentences. What's the best way to reduce crime? Well, you got it. The answer is stop fighting about it. Left, right, liberal, conservative, stop fighting about it. The best way to reduce crime is to do both. But here's what some people don't agree with, and this is the key to making it work. There's a different priority. The law enforcement comes first. If I had improved the schools of New York City on the first day I came into office and made them the best schools in the world, or if you made the schools in Tijuana the best schools in the world, do you know when you would see a reduction in crime? 6 or 7 years from now. Because that's what it takes for a school system to change. And for a population to change. After all, the change you make now didn't help the kid a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, or 4 or 5 was committing crimes. If I get jobs for people, a lot of the people that are committing crimes don't want jobs. They don't take, I could produce all the jobs that you can imagine. I was just in Florida with the governor of Florida. He's got 4,000 jobs nobody wants because Florida is growing so fast. The first answer to crime when you have a crisis, and we had a crisis, and Colombia had a crisis, and I was just in Guatemala. Guatemala has a crisis. I'm going to go to Honduras. Honduras has a crisis. The first answer is you got to get the law enforcement right. You got to start to get the crime down. That's got to be the first priority, because nothing else is going to work if you don't get the first priority right. Priority has to be the correct number of police. You've got to pay the police the correct amount of money. You got to fix the prosecutors, the courts, the prisons. You got to make that work. That costs a lot of money. There's no doubt about it. One of the answers to police corruption is paying the police more money. When we worked on police corruption,